In today's video we're going to be going through the match perspective camera option, and what this basically does is it helps you match the perspective camera to the camera angle with which a backplate image was taken. So if I go down in the camera options, you can see the match perspective button is here. This won't work unless you've got a backplate image, so we're just going to add that now. If I go over to the environment tabs, down to background, and we've got lighting, environment, color, and then backplate image. So I want to select backplate image, and up here I've got this image here of a empty interior. So if I click on that and load that up, this was taken from a website called pexels.com, I believe, and it's all free downloads, so I've nabbed it from there. So as you can see now, if I'm clicking and dragging, that backplate image obviously isn't moving, it's covering everything up, but you can see down here in the bottom left that that coordinate legend is moving as I move the mouse. So if that isn't turned on, you can press Z on the keyboard or go up to the top, view, and then show coordinate legend here. This is just going to help us give us some context as to where our objects are. So if I add in a model, I'm going to go to downloads, and these are all just from the KeyShot cloud library. So I'm going to drag in this coffee table here and move this to the side, make it a little bit smaller. And now if I go over to the camera option, click on match perspective, you're going to be met with these three sets of lines. Down here we've got the 2-point perspective and 3-point perspective. Basically the 2-point perspective is going to work in most cases, but you can use the 3-point if the vertical lines in the image, so say the corner of the rooms here, are all a little bit more extreme. So say the camera's quite low down to the floor looking up, or alternatively looking down from quite a high position, then those vertical lines might be skewed inwards or outwards a little bit more. So in this case, verticals all look pretty parallel, so I'm going to switch it back to 2-point perspective. The other 2 or 3 options that we've got down here, we've got lock rotation. So you can't actually untick that if you've got the 2-point perspective active, but if you've got 3-point perspective active, you can turn that off and on. What this is going to do is it just means that any adjustment to the 3 sets of lines won't affect the azimuth. The next option is the ground grid. If I select that, you can see a ground grid appears, and it just gives me a little bit more context as to where that model is. Just helps you match the perspective to the image. This won't appear in your final rendered image either. It's purely just for setup reasons. And then the reset lines is just going to reset those lines back to their default position. So from here, I'm just going to make the table a little bit smaller, and I'm going to start to line up these lines. So I'm going to pick up a strong line here where the wall meets the floor. I'm just clicking and dragging on the square here and the triangle here, just the 2 ends of the lines. So now that those are lined up, you can see that table is looking like it's in the right perspective, and now it's a case of moving it around, making it bigger and smaller until it looks like it's fitting in with the actual scene. It might help not using the scroll wheel and actually making some fine adjustments using the distance slider up at the top on the right. So this looks about right to me. Now we've got to move on to the lighting of the scene. So this image has got a certain type of lighting, and the environment that we're using is still just the default, so we have to try and match it to the image as close as possible. So what I'm going to do is just try and start from a pretty much blank template, and I'm going to go into the HDRI editor. I'm going to keep the default background, but I'm going to reduce its brightness right down to, let's say, about 0.1, and it's completely grayscale. So what I'm going to do is, I think I'll change it so that it's a similar colour to the walls here, so that light's going to be bouncing off those walls and reflecting onto the table. I might change this later on, we'll see how it looks. So I'm going to go down to the colorize button and then grab the eyedropper tool and take a colour from the wall there. There's going to be a very slight change. I'm also not liking how these left hand side legs are lining up with each other. It makes it look like one big long one, so I'm going to just twist that around slightly using the azimuth slider. So back to the environment, I'm going to start adding in a couple of pins. So we just want to keep this really pretty simple. The first one I'm going to add in, I'm going to try and get this light coming in from the window and see if I can get that reflecting off the top of the table there. So we want these straight lines, so I'm going to change that pin to be rectangular. And I'm going to increase the brightness so we can see what's going on a little bit better. I'm going to keep that crosshairs highlight tool selected, and I'm just going to select that top surface and click done. And now I'm going to just adjust it till it's nearly there. So now you can see that light's coming in from this direction here where my mouse is, and it's coming in across at the wrong angle. So we're going to try and adjust this slightly. So we're going to do that by changing the angle of the pin. So if I decrease it, you can see it's starting to get to around the right direction. So that's maybe a little too far. Around -25 seems about right. So now the light's coming in, it's maybe slightly too far over to the left, so I'm just going to adjust that. Okay, so I'm kind of happy with that, it's getting there. Now instead of this being a completely white light, I think I'm going to grab the colour from these reflections, or possibly from the sky. Let's see what looks better. So the colour, again, eyedropper tool, let's pick that light there. It's kind of starting to match up now. Let's try the sky. I think I prefer the sky, so I'll click OK. Now it's a little bit too sharp of a line. If I look down here, it's got a bit more of a gradient there, so I'm going to also increase the fall off. This might mean that the position of the pin will need to change. So that's probably a little bit better, but it's now a bit too far over to the right, so I'm going to bring that back over. There we go. Now we probably only need one more pin just to give the other side of the table a little bit more light, so that light's coming inside the room and it's bouncing off that wall, and we want a little bit over here, I think. So let's add in another pin, use the highlight tool, let's highlight this edge over here, click done, and I'm going to do the same as what I did with the background. I'm going to click on colour, eyedropper tool, and then pick on one of these wall colours. Now I'm going to increase the size and the fall off. Now that's looking okay to me. Now finally I'm going to go back to the main settings of the environment, scroll down to the bottom, ground shadows are on, makes a big difference, and I don't want occlusion ground shadows, as if I tick that you can see why. Ground reflections I'm not bothered about either, I don't think that makes a difference. And then flatten ground, let's tick that, and you'll see that that light from those pins that we put in now act as if there's a proper ground there, which is what we want. Finally I'm going to go into the lighting tab, I'm going to change it to product, and normally over on the image tab I'd go into photographic, but since we're using an image that's already been post edited by the photographer, it's probably best just to leave it as basic. If I change it over to photographic, it's going to affect that backplate image as well, so I'm going to leave that on basic. I'll add in a tiny bit of denoise, let's put it 0.3 just to clean up this image. And finally, which should have probably been done earlier before any of the lighting parts, but it seems to match up pretty well anyway, but we do need to go into the camera tab and adjust this focal length. So the image that I got from Pexels, that actually had the focal length of the camera that was being used for that backplate image. So if you've got that information, then that's great, it makes it life a lot easier. And the focal length was 18 millimeters. That'll just help it adjust to the scene that bit better. Otherwise, it's a bit of trial and error. For these interior shots, they tend to be using a smaller focal length just so that they can capture a larger area of the room. So it's always a good place to start. Once we've got this all set up, even if we drag in different and new models, then they're all going to be within that perspective. So if I click and drag that bottle in, it's going to be sitting on the table, it's going to have that same perspective. And we can do that with any number of products. So I hope this video has been useful. The match perspective tool, as you can see, it's a much quicker way of creating a scene with a realistic, high quality background. Sometimes the hardest part is just finding those images that are free to use, that are suitable for the product that you need rendering. If you have any questions on the match perspective tool or anything that I've gone through in this video, then just leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.